Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Hello, my name is Esteban Gutiérrez. You are listening to At the Controls with Jonathan Legard and Mark Gallagher.
Hello and welcome to At the Controls with Jonathan Legard and Mark Gallagher, the podcast that takes inspiration from Formula One, the people, the cars, the technology, and the positive philosophy that underpins the sport. In this episode, we're getting a privileged insight into what makes Mercedes such a dominant force in the sport. We're talking to both sides of the team's garage, the two unsung heroes who joined Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas on the podium in Spa and Austria, respectively, as well as the man in the middle, the reserve driver, Esteban Gutiérrez. We'll also be remembering one of Formula One's greats, the driver with that film star swagger, Jochen Rindt, 50 years after his death at Monza. But first, Mark, confirmation of that much-anticipated news that Sebastian Vettel will be driving for Aston Martin in 2021 in place of Sergio Perez.
Yeah, it was like a moment for a James Bond-type assassin, wasn't it, to destroy Ferrari's celebrations with that announcement on the eve of this race weekend. And it's a remarkable turnaround for Sebastian after what's been a very difficult year for him, and great to see him land on his feet, and for Formula One to keep its 4 times world champion fully in play next season.
Sergio Perez, where do we see him? Is this goodbye, or do you think there's an opening somewhere like, I know, Haas, he's been mentioned there as a possible?
Well, there's always openings for talent, and he's certainly a talented driver and now a very experienced driver into the bargain. But there are always even bigger openings if you've got money, and he's got access to Carlos Slim, richest man in the world for anyone who needs to know. And that means that there's a good chance that he can bring some funding with him. And I think there will be conversations going on between him and other teams at the current time, be that Alfa Romeo or Haas or even the Williams Formula One team. Who knows, perhaps their new owners will consider Sergio Perez and his experience with Mercedes-Benz powertrains to be a useful asset to bring into their team.
But more immediately, I suppose we've got this race at Mugello to look forward to this weekend and the rest of the 2020 Formula One season unfolding. And if there's one Formula One driver who knows all about this track for the weekend, it's the Mercedes reserve driver Esteban Gutiérrez, who's been clocking up the miles in the Mercedes simulator ahead of this weekend's Tuscan Grand Prix, as we should call it. I went to meet Esteban this week at his home in London, both of us socially distanced, I should say, and we talked about that supposedly missed opportunity to race at Silverstone last month, his growing role at Mercedes, his plans to become a team owner, and first, all the legwork he's been doing for Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas for this next race.
Many hours.
Have you lost count?
Many laps. I lost count of them, but fundamentally a day of simulator, I think, is about 9 hours. You start at 9 a.m. and you finish at 6 p.m. It's a long day. A lot of laps. You go through the program. You go through different setup adjustments, different aero configurations, and it's all about giving very precise feedback to the team of engineers that we work together in the simulator in order to make proper evaluations of the tests that are being done.
What's it going to be like in a Formula One car then? You've done the simulator, but what's it going to be like for real? Because it's a track which has such a reputation. But Formula One going there?
It's going to be incredible. The race probably will not be as attractive as other races because there will be very little overtaking. But Mugello is such an incredible track, so fast, with these cars that we have today, with so much downforce, so fast in the corners. It's just going to be really insane to watch the onboards of those cars.
How much do you feel part of the team? How much do you feel, I think Toto Wolff said, you are very much a pillar of the team. Do you sense that yourself, how involved you are and what you're contributing?
Yes, luckily my involvement with the team has been an incredible experience as a professional, not only as a driver, but also in other areas that have challenged me quite a lot. I've used this opportunity to expose myself to other areas of the team, to really learn and to get myself better as a professional and go beyond just being a driver. And that has been my target in these years that I've been working with Mercedes, and it has given me a lot of opportunity to learn in those different areas.
Such as?
For example, I've worked in the commercial team with some sponsorship acquisition.
You brought in sponsors?
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
Yeah.
That's impressive.
And then there was some other areas where, me as an ambassador working in some events. Then there is a bit of, the management role, which, comes together with the commercial and the marketing. So it's really cool and interesting stuff that I've learned that has really given me a lot of experience.
Does it give you anything like the buzz, say closing off a deal, and we'll come to your commercial acumen because you were doing stuff, selling and buying stuff when you were 11, so you know what you're doing. Does it give you any sense of the adrenaline and buzz that driving does?
Massively.
Really?
The negotiation part is very, very thrilling. I like that very much. I like looking at the strategy, looking at how things can get connected, as well as building a sustainable relationship, whether it's a relationship or a business that requires, to achieve good numbers, good sales, good, customer experience. All of those things, I really enjoy it a lot.
You were mentioned when Sergio Perez tested positive for COVID-19 as a possible driver, and for whatever reason, with the super license wasn't there, you didn't get the chance. A, how frustrating was that? And B, how can you put yourself in the situation where you might be able to do it? Because the FIA had this rule that you've got to have done in the last 3 years 300 kilometres of testing or something. So how difficult was that for you to sit and watch Nico Hülkenberg drive when you thought, that could have been me in the Racing Point at Silverstone?
I've had an incredible chance to be part of Mercedes. For me, that has a much bigger meaning than just that particular event in Silverstone. That event in Silverstone came as a surprise. It was never meant for me to jump in the car. It was really, a situation that Racing Point simply looked at Hülkenberg. Hülkenberg was racing in Formula One maybe 8 months before that. So, it makes a lot of sense why they made that decision. Obviously, they had an option on me as well, but it was never meant to be that way. So far, my experience with Mercedes has been really positive. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to be part of the team throughout these years, and I'm sure the relationship will continue massively going forwards.
You got a big telly here to my left in your living room. And when you watching Nico Hülkenberg at Silverstone put it third on the grid, there was no thought of you going, that could have been me. Or, for example, Pierre Gasly, if you'd still been in Formula 1, he wins at Monza. Is there any sort of regrets going, that could have been me?
No regrets. I look at the future. It's really what I'm focused on. I don't care what happened in the past. I cannot change that. What I can only change is what happens today, what happens now, and what happens in the future. And that is where my focus is.
What did you learn, say, from Formula One, say, setbacks, say, at Sauber not continuing there, or with Haas and so on? How has that made you where you are now with the mindset that you have now?
Where can I start? It's been a long journey, a journey that I have enjoyed massively, and that has given me so much opportunity to learn, and I have achieved so much more than what probably I could have expected. I've reached Formula One. I have been one of the 6 drivers in the whole history to get to Formula One as a Mexican. And those things I'm very fortunate about, and I feel very fortunate about. Of course, I haven't achieved what I would have liked to achieve. I, of course, was always targeting to be a world champion, to be, that was the target. That has always been the target. But I reach probably quite a big percentage of my vision and my target as a racing driver, pursuing that, the top of motorsports. And I feel great about it. I mean, it's been, whole new experience going through the different categories to reach Formula One, be on a team that has been, massively financial struggles with Sauber in 2013 and 2014. There was the change of the hybrid era with the engines. We were racing with Ferrari engines, and we were lacking maybe about 20 kilometers on the straights compared to other cars. Then, I went on to be a reserve driver for Ferrari, which is, an incredible, place to be, an incredible achievement as well. That from my perspective and, life being there, it's been incredible. And then after that, I went to Haas, which is a team starting from scratch. So we basically built a team from zero. And that was an interesting exercise, leaving all the struggles of not having the, obviously the full capacity to run two cars, and, trying to find that balance of how much we want to push on to how much there was the capacity to push. And then from there, I went on to Mercedes, which is, again, the top team in motorsports in the world. So I've had an incredible opportunity to experience and to learn and so many great moments, funny moments, interesting moments, a lot of lessons, obviously a lot of very difficult moments as well, which I believe those are the ones that give you the most experience.
But that's what we all say, I think, isn't it? We learn more from our mistakes or failures or disappointments than we do when we're in the moment and we're winning all the time. That's not to say that Lewis Hamilton is not learning all the time, because he's achieving many, many great things. Do I detect then, in a sense, that Formula One as a driver for you may be a closed book, but you're developing in a different way in Formula One, but also do you still have ambitions elsewhere? You've done IndyCar, you've done Formula E. Is that still on your radar in terms of driving competitively, not just on Twitch?
My role as a driver, I would say I am very, very realistic, and as well I have my vision which goes beyond being a driver. So it's not something that I totally, let's say, I put myself in a position where I just want to drive for the sake of driving, and I just want to be in a category for the sake of being there. No, I drive because I enjoy it, because it gets it fulfills my competitive instinct, and it's my big passion. I'm right now in the process of finding the right balance between me as a driver and me and my other priorities as well. So that is something that will come eventually at the right time and at the right moment.
29, married, living in London, working for Mercedes. Some people might say you got a dream job. Where do you see yourself at the moment? Is this you're looking for a driving opportunity, or, as you've already hinted, you've got other business opportunities and other business interests as much as doing work within the Mercedes team? Do you see this as a platform to maybe prepare for a life after driving, whenever that might be?
I really enjoy my work with Mercedes because I believe in the brand. The brand values go very well with my values, and that's why I identify myself with the brand very much. And, being part of that process is very special. Then, of course, my other involvements are part of me evolving as a professional, and as well as, executing my vision, my long-term vision, which I have for myself as a professional and as a person.
What is that? Do you know? Have you got in your mind what that long-term vision is?
Yes, I would like to build a sustainable business that gives a lot of value. I am currently working on creating a retail company on e-commerce. It's been an interesting process. I'm also a business partner in a railway business, which is a complete different...
Wow. In England or back in Mexico?
In the world.
Oh, in the world?
Actually, I have my partners are from Poland, and we've worked together in projects in Abu Dhabi, in India, in Mexico, in the US. So it's quite a big scope, and the reason why a lot of people ask me, why are you involved in that, railways business? And I say, well, it's so far away from my comfort zone that I need to do it because it's part of my learning experience. It's part of me developing as a professional. I really go for it because I want to learn. I want to expand my level of knowledge to have a bigger scope of the world as well.
Extreme E appeal to you in any way? Lewis Hamilton's announced his team this week. X44.
That's great. I hope that it goes really well for him.
Did that appeal to you though?
Well, to me personally, eventually I would like to have, of course, in the future a team.
I wonder whether that was one of my next question then. Are you a team owner in some form?
Yes, definitely. That's part of my.
Wow. Okay, interesting.
That's part of my vision in the future. Yes.
So you've got a bit of a master plan already then?
Yes, you can always have a plan. You have to. This year has given us a lot of lessons. If I would have been telling you in December or January that the world will collapse and everyone will stop and everyone will have to be staying at home and that all the events are going to be cancelled, anyone would have said you are crazy. But it did happen. And this is how important to understand that, you just mentioned that about Twitch and streaming and racing online. That was one of the most interesting exercises I ever done because you have to reinvent yourself as a driver. We suddenly came away from being in this bubble or in this, let's say, Formula One world where we travel around the world and we see, we are very focused on our targets and very focused on our things. But then suddenly we find ourselves at home and we find ourselves thinking and we find ourselves connecting with people through a video conference or, let's say, streaming. And you can be racing and at the same time you are sharing your thoughts about the race live with those who are watching you. So it was an incredible time that I really enjoyed.
Just picking up on something you said before about, you've always been interested in business and, you were doing stuff, sort of buying and selling stuff when you were 11 years old, weren't you?
Yes, I was. I had my first business when I was 11.
Wow.
I was actually selling simulators.
Really?
Simulators, yes.
Where did you get those then? How'd you
I was building them.
You built them?
Yeah, I was, I had my business partner. My business partner...
How old was he or she?
He was about 50 years old, so I made an agreement with him that he was going to take care of a bit of the admin side because I was 11 years old and I couldn't, execute as an administrator.
I thought you were going to say your partner was 13. It's like, God, this is extraordinary.
And that we were going to do everything through him. And, I had all the knowledge of how to put together the computers, what the computers needed to have in place to then, design, the seat and the whole rig. And that's how I started my first business.
How long did it last and how successful were you?
Well, it was quite successful. I was 11, 12 years old and I had about $5,000 in my pocket.
So, pretty good. Here's a thought. Toto Wolff, if you're thinking of becoming a team owner, what have you learned from him? How do you see him operating? What are his strengths? How does he build the team, as he has done, into this extraordinary winning machine, probably unprecedented in Formula One, in motorsport?
I would say communication and transparency in very clear goals. That's Toto's biggest strength.
In a supportive way or in a dynamic way, not so much aggressive, but come on, we've got to do this, or just listening and always talking and making sure that everyone knows where we're going and what they've done wrong and how to improve and how to take it to another level.
Yes, there is no blame. There is a no blaming culture. There is a lot of empowering the team, and that is his main target.
And what's it going to be like to be part of another double World Championship winning team? Because surely no one's going to stop Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton, are they, really, in 2020?
It's going to be hard. What the team has achieved so far is obviously exceptional. It goes without saying that they're still human beings. There are still some errors that happen on track. We all have to recognize that we are human beings and we, try to do our best. And sometimes particular organizations work really well, and they have like this cycle that goes really nicely, and you achieve so many championships together. And in this case with Mercedes, it's achieving history in Formula One.
I know I went to his house and he extended some great hospitality, but I have to say I found him a very impressive young man, really switched on, and having spoken to lots of sports people across all sorts of different sports, very rare to find someone at that age, 29 years old, to be planning for life after competing, after driving, as you might say. How many teams involve a driver too in doing deals?
Yeah, really an exceptional guy, clearly very well educated, something that's been very clear from the moment he broke through to the racing scene here in Europe. And as you say, clearly a very broad view of his role, not just as a driver, but as a player in motorsport, including doing deals. And lots of drivers kind of avoid that. They let other people do the deals around him. I think he really enjoys the business side of it. And it's been absolutely fascinating to hear him telling you, Jonathan, about his plans for the future, including his ambitions to be a team owner. So an all-round impressive guy, and one who I've had the privilege to meet and spend a bit of time with, and found him to be someone really with a very old head on his shoulders. And I've been a little bit disappointed that his driving career hasn't quite worked out in the way that he would have wished. But clearly he's now got a vision of where he wants to be in the future. And I think he's definitely got to be a man to watch. I think there'd probably be quite big things ahead for Esteban Gutiérrez.
On the subject of being team principal, I wonder how much he's going to use and adopt some of Toto Wolff's skills. He heard him there talking about how he's so impressed by the Mercedes boss empowering people. And I know you feel very strongly about that. And we're going to hear from two prime examples of how Mercedes do empower all their team members.
Yes, well, it's a subject very close to my heart, Jonathan, because one of my big takeaways from working at the forefront of Formula One is the extent to which having the right culture within a team really does make all the difference. Now, at Mercedes, we've seen a manufacturer who have learned to do Formula One in absolutely the right way. Yes, like everyone else, they have the technical facilities and the money and the ambition to win in Formula One, but they also have something else, a team spirit that really seems to constantly drive them forward to try and improve, to keep pushing forward and to never settle for second best. And as you mentioned, Toto Wolff, well, under his leadership, the team has been firmly committed to recognising that everyone who works for the team in Brackley and for the engine division in Brixworth plays a part in the success that Mercedes achieves. And a very public display of that, and one that's always really impressed me, is the fact that anyone in the team attending a race can be asked to represent the team when accepting the winning Constructors' Trophy on the podium. So with the help of Bradley Lord and Rosa Herrero in the team's communications department, we spoke to Sam Bradley, the front-end mechanic on Lewis Hamilton's car, and Holly Chapman, the powertrain engineer for Valtteri Bottas. Sam took to the podium in Belgium, which I think you mentioned earlier, while Holly had her moment in the sun in Austria. And we started by asking Sam about that moment when he learned that he'd be joining a Formula One podium ceremony.
Well, first off, I was completely shocked I was going up there, to be honest. I was stood there waving over the pit wall, celebrating with everyone, and Toto walked up to me, and I thought he was joking, because me and Toto, he's a nice chap, and we have a bit of a joke every now and then. He walked up to me and went, "Oh, you're going on the podium?" And I was like, yeah, I'll go on the podium, no worries. And then he went, "No, you're going on the podium." And I was like, "Really?" And then I was like, oh my God. Walking through the corridor with Lewis, and he was so happy for me. He was like, this is so cool, isn't it? And I was like, yeah. I said to him, "Do you still get nervous?" Because I'm really nervous. I felt myself nearly shaking. And he was like, yeah, it's still get nervous to this day. And then I can't really remember what else we were chatting about, because I was like on a different planet, to be honest. And then I heard my name getting called out, walked out, looked down and saw all the team there. And I was just like, God, this is unreal.
I love the fact that there's an immediacy to this. So I think a lot of people watching this think that, the person is told 5 days before and there's a big PR meeting and what do you have to do on the podium? Yeah. It's extraordinary that it really is last minute. So for you, it was just a spontaneous thing to happen. I mean, that adds a whole level of excitement, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, it was unreal. And, it was really nice. And I was quite honoured that Toto asked me, to be honest. And then looking over at Valtteri and Lewis, I was like, God, this is unreal.
How worried were you that you might drop the trophy?
Oh, honestly, walking out there, all I was thinking to myself was, don't trip over don't drop the trophy, and make sure you do a good effort of spraying the champagne, because I watched Bono do it a few races before and he made a complete hash of it. So I thought, I need to go in big and get them both before they get me. It's something you'll never forget, and hopefully, like, my daughter will see it one day when she's grown up and be quite proud of me, hopefully.
How important is it that a team recognises everyone within a team? What does that do for team spirit?
I think that's where we are very good at Mercedes. Obviously, outside looking in, it looks dead professional and stuff, and it is. But Toto's always got time to come around and chat to all the mechanics. He knows all our names really well. We have a joke with him and stuff. And keeping that level of humanity throughout, no matter who you are in the team, I think really, really goes a long way.
Now, Sam, what about your start in motorsport? Now, you began in karting. So did you have ambitions to become a Formula One driver yourself?
We didn't have a lot of money. My dad was just into motor racing. We always had little banger go-karts and stuff when we were on airfields in Lincolnshire, just, you know, me and him in a knackered van, really. And luckily I became quite good and got a bit of sponsorship and stuff. We always watched Formula One together, and I'd never really thought about being a Formula One mechanic. Well, I did. I loved building stuff, and I think I loved prepping the kart more than I did racing it sometimes. I just loved taking things apart, cleaning it, making sure it's like ready to go and stuff. And when I left school, I didn't really ever think, you know, telling your careers officer you want to be a Formula One mechanic, they probably pretty much laugh at you. So it's bits like that where you stand on the podium, you think, oh, I've achieved something in my life. It's quite special, really.
It's quite a jump from, you know, being a good mechanic to being able to work really fast and really efficiently in a pit stop in Formula One, where tenths of seconds matter. It's not a question of, I'll be with you in a minute, don't worry. You've got to be there on it now.
Yeah. I'll never forget my first pit stop doing the wheel gun. It was in Hungary, 2013. And Lewis wasn't meant to win that race. Like, the car was quick in qualifying, but it wasn't quick over a race distance. And Bono and the other engineer, Jock, at the time, said to me, oh, don't worry, just relax. You know, we're on pole, but he won't win. It'll overheat the tyres and we'll be, you know, 5th or 6th. And he was out in the lead by miles. And I was just sat there thinking to myself, you know, there's people going to war, dying. You're not going to die. It's a lot of pressure. Just compose yourself. I just remember being so nervous about doing it and panicking throughout I think they left it really late. And I think the Red Bull was coming for us because Vettel was in that Red Bull and it was really rapid at the time. And I just sat there just thinking, just don't mess up. But that's the only time I can really remember it, really. But yeah, it was very cool.
What's the kind of the feeling in the team when something doesn't go so well?
They don't really put too much pressure on us. They know there's a lot of pressure on us. And we're not trying to be the fastest at pit stops. They try and target like 2.3 seconds, which, you know, we should comfortably do all the time. But for me, a bad pit stop is where I miss the wheel nut going on, and that'll hold the stop up. Or if I miss the wheel nut reconnecting when the wheel's going back on, you know, that's a bad stop for us. It really depends on, for me, if the driver stops on the marks or stops short or stops long. You normally got like say 30 centimetres either side of the marks where you can do it correctly, really.
Sam, Mercedes seem to be experts at double stacking. Explain that to us, because clearly yeah. That's a whole other level again, where you're just machine gunning one pit stop after another. And I mean, you seem to be able to do it really seamlessly. Does that add another whole level of complexity to your job?
Everyone's really proud and happy when it's gone well. And I think it was in China, or I can't remember. We did one, literally it came in. The rear jack guys, is like, he's got to get out of the way quick, really. The front jackman and the rear jackman, that's probably the hardest bit for them, because we practice double stacks quite a lot, but they've actually got to relatch the jack, get out of the way, and then go back in and get ready for the second car in like split seconds. But it's when it works really well and you see it back on the TV, you're just like, bloody hell, that's cool. That looks awesome.
How much do you practice, though? How much in a week, say, for example, are you doing it again and again and again? Because they say practice makes perfect. But, I mean, how many times in a week, shall we say?
So we do pit stop practice on a Thursday, and we'll do probably 20 pit stops on a Thursday. Same on a Friday. We'll do live stops at the end of every session Friday. Saturday, we'll do pit stop practice again, 20 stops, and Sunday we'll do 20 stops again. But the trouble is, it becomes a point where you practice does make perfect, but the wheels are heavy, the guns are heavy, it's quite brutal on your body. It's like, you're slamming your wrists against a brick wall, really, holding the wheel gun, because you're that positive, getting on the nut. You're like really smashing your arms into a wheel, really. It's it's quite brutal, so it can do too much and knacker everyone out before the race, really.
Sam, what was the reaction of your friends and family to seeing you unexpectedly on the podium in Belgium? How did that all go?
Oh, it's unreal. It's bizarre, because my best friend Leo rang my dad and my wife and my family, because he works in the team, and they're all watching TV, and my little girl, there's a real cute shot of her looking at the TV, pointing at me, up on the podium. And honestly, my phone it just didn't stop all night. I had to turn it off in the end. I need to stop looking at it. I rang all my family, obviously, and everyone was like, even other mechanics down the pit lane, and because they obviously don't see mechanics on the podium very often, especially number 2 mechanics, they were just so happy for me. It was just unreal. The whole team was out there, and it was really, really cool, to be honest. It was just something I'll never forget.
It was on the in-lap, I think, of the race. Bradley Law popped up to the truck to where my desk is, popped his head over the barrier and asked if I would like to represent the team. Never expected that it would happen, but very grateful that it did.
Bradley Law is Director of Communications of the Mercedes-Benz Formula One team. The kind of immediacy of that, which we also talked to Sam about, the slightly unexpected timing. You get someone telling you you're going on the podium. What was your immediate reaction? Were you thrilled, or were you a quivering wreck when you heard that?
A bit of both, really. That and, well, the car's still running, so can I go now, or do I need to wait? It's hard to put it into words. I mean, it's very, very surreal, even now thinking back about it, that I was up there representing Mercedes, and 2 steps to my left was Valtteri Bottas, who's just won a race. And I'm up there with him. And then there's all my teammates, all the crew, stood out in front, cheering us all on. I still haven't found the words for it.
And what about the reaction of family and friends? How many text messages did you have?
Yeah, my mum was absolutely beside herself, as was my stepdad. Obviously, he got me into Formula One. I started watching it with him when I was about 16. So they just couldn't believe it, that it was me up there. But what they do is brilliant. And as well, Sam going up there, he did a great job.
Holly, just talk to us about your role at Mercedes-Benz, because you're a powertrain engineer. Talk us through a typical weekend for you.
Yeah, so I'm responsible for all power units for Valtteri Bottas. So that's everything, the ICE, the turbo, the MGUH, MGUK, the ERS battery, and the power electronics. So weekends tend to start actually before we get to the track. There's a lot of preparation that goes on at the factory. As well, a lot of reporting from the previous event. So we always carry forward the lessons from the previous event into the next one. And it's a pretty quick turnaround on those. So in terms of the track, it tends to start on a Wednesday. So that's when we're building the car, setting everything up, so sorting out the code for the ECU. We might have a few meetings on that day, kind of team meetings, catch-ups. But then into Thursday, Thursday's when we're first allowed to fire up. So that's really the main aim of Thursday, and setting the car up. It goes down to the patch and back again a couple of times. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I think you've probably seen one side of it in terms of the track running, but there's a lot of preparation that goes into that bit of running on track. All the meetings that go around that, the briefings, how are you going to manage energy, all of that, and briefings with the drivers. And Valtteri's very involved with that as well. We're constantly discussing ideas and plans and things well before the session and for a long while after. It's continuous from probably Thursday, I would say.
Now, you're a female engineer working at the very highest level in Formula One. What's your view? Do you see a positive trend towards more women taking operational and technical roles in Formula One in the years ahead?
I think so. Yeah, definitely. It's going in the right direction. I mean, when I started at university, there were, I think, about 80 people on my course on automotive engineering, and 4 of them were women, which is quite a daunting scene when you arrive into a lecture hall for your induction and that's what you're faced with. But nonetheless, I think it is improving. mean, I can't speak for everywhere, but certainly at HPP, there have been more women coming through on the graduate schemes and on the placement schemes. And they're not there because they're women, they're there because they're good at what they do. So I think it is going in the right direction. I appreciate it might take a little bit of time for the numbers to get up, but I think it is filtering through slowly. And when I started college, I just chose subjects that I enjoyed because I still didn't quite know what I wanted to do with my life. That from that point, I realised that actually the subjects I was studying at college were a good fit for engineering. And the more I looked into it, the more I realised, this is a great opportunity for continuous development. Engineering never stops. We don't live in a static world. There'll always be a new challenge. So that was really what encouraged me towards engineering as a whole. But yeah, then the more races I watched, the more interested I got, and I decided to go after that at university. Just, I think, as I was starting my final year of university, I started applying for graduate schemes and so on, and got obviously a response from HPP. Went to the first stage of interviews, got a call back, and I wasn't expecting it to be good news, but it was. So I went to the second stage, and again got a call back, thinking, no, there's not a chance I've got this.
Why are you so negative? You must be good.
It's just my mentality that I never think I've done that job perfectly. And in reality, I'm only human, so I won't ever do a job perfectly, but that doesn't mean I don't stop pushing for that. That's why I'll always go back after the interviews and analyse everything that I've said.
You should be a Mercedes engineer. Oh, you are one.
I think, Holly, you just answered your own question about, why you've ended up in that role and why you were the right person to choose, because it is that ability to analyse, to actually be a perfectionist. What can I do to get the perfect delivery? That's what Formula One engineering is all about. It's just a progression towards perfection if you can possibly make it. So well done you on where you've got to.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I found it absolutely fascinating to talk to the pair of them, because they're not team members who are normally interviewed by the media, and for us to be given access to them and to hear the enthusiasm that both of them bring to their jobs in very different ways. I love Sam's story, starting in kart racing and finding himself as a mechanic on Lewis Hamilton's car, strapping Lewis into the cockpit every weekend and then ending up on the podium. And then I think Holly's story, very different, her route into deciding I'm going to become an engineer. And I love the fact that she said she doesn't even have the words to describe the experience of standing on the podium. So great insights from people who are absolutely at the coalface of Formula One, some of the unsung heroes given their moment in the sun. And I don't know about you, Jonathan, but I think we gained quite an insight there into just why Mercedes-Benz is such a top team.
Yep, I mean, it's the camaraderie of the Formula One pit crew, which is always a thing to behold whenever you see them practicing on a Friday morning, Saturday morning, race day morning, and the number of times, as Sam was telling us, how often they do that, because practice should make perfect. It doesn't always go that well, but it's also just the passion for the job. You can sense it from what he was saying, and also in a completely different way, what makes Mercedes and any top Formula One team, when they're on song, go well. It's the expertise, the excellence, and the commitment which you heard from Holly to seek perfection in everything they do to gain that performance. And we know that's a long-standing trait in Formula One. Teams are always pushing the limits. And of course, when it works, there's a brilliant synergy. When the balance between risk and reward fails, then the consequences can be devastating. That's where we're going now, because that was the case at Monza 50 years ago when Jochen Rindt lost his life in practice for the 1970 Italian Grand Prix. If you know Formula One history, you've followed it for years, or are still interested in sort of delving back rather than if you even have just sort of come to Formula One in the last 10 years or so, cars designed by the Lotus team owner Colin Chapman, the genius owner, were regularly dancing on the edge of darkness and blinding light, and the battles between Rindt and Chapman, with Bernie Ecclestone trying to mediate, are given full rein in the new paperback edition of David Tremaine's biography of the only Formula One driver to be awarded the World Championship posthumously. And Mark and I have been talking to David about the driver who was one of Grand Prix racing's first superstars.
Well, when I write books like this about drivers who aren't with us anymore, the primary aim is so that people don't forget them. And I like, when I'm working on a project, to know what the next mountain's going to be. So when I was doing The Lost Generation about Roger Williamson, Tom Price and Tony Bryce, I was thinking, what am I going to write next? And Jochen was such an obvious subject because he was so completely underwritten.
David, when you listen to a story of the kind that is Jochen Rindt's life, and it was a short life, and then the people who he came into contact with, he had a massive impact on our sport and on a lot of key individuals, which actually is still having its effect to this day. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it is. I mean, I love Helmut Marko, and I love the way people say, Helmut can't do that. He's so hard with the drivers. And you think if you read what Helmut was like in the days when he and Jochen used to do these races from Graz to Vienna and back, no quarter asked or given, and certainly no sensitivity shown. And if you fell off and damaged your car, you were on your own. That's when they were out with their mates. So, of course, Helmut behaves the way he does. He's not going to wet nurse little racing drivers. He expects them to be tough guys.
But I found it very interesting when Helmut was talking recently about the impact that Jochen had on Dietrich Mateschitz, owner of Red Bull, and in fact, this is something that I remember very well. When Red Bull bought the Jaguar Formula One team, Dietrich came to the factory and he gave a 30-minute speech about why he had bought a Formula One team and his ambitions for Red Bull. And in that speech, he talked about the fact that he had been a passionate fan of Formula One back to the 1960s. And he mentioned Jochen Rindt. And exactly to your point, David, not many people in the Jaguar racing team knew who Jochen Rindt was. And yet here was Dietrich Mateschitz all these years later saying, I've bought a Formula One team because Jochen Rindt got me involved in Formula One.
I mean, Jochen was such a trailblazer. And the thing I love is, when he turned up at Mallory in Crystal Palace in 64 and finished third in one from pole and then dominated the other. And everyone's going, who the hell is Jochen Rindt? What I love is one guy could have told you exactly who he was. And that guy's name was Frank Williams, because Frank spotted Jochen's talent early on and was besotted by him and would tell him so. Jochen was in his pink shirts, red trousers, white E-type, all that sort of stuff. And Frank's thinking, well, who is this guy? But then he watched him race and suddenly thought, wow, this guy's just on it. And then he appeared like this meteor in Formula One. And of course, he was the reason why Austria got on the Formula One map. And then we had Helmut and Nicky and Gerhard. It's a great story, isn't it? How he just opened up a country's interest in Formula One.
I wonder if that's one of the reasons Helmut Marko rates a driver like Max, and maybe very specifically Max Verstappen, because he sees a kind of mini Jochen Rindt in him.
It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest, because he would really like the fact that Max was self-sufficient, spoke his mind, knew what he wanted right from the moment he got in an F1 car. That's different, isn't it? A lot of guys get in sort of, they might be great in the driving terms, but they're usually quite shy and cowed and quiet, wanting to fit in with the team, whereas Max knew just how good he was from day one, just like Jochen did. And when he got in the car, he knew what he wanted, and he was going to make sure he got it.
How much longer do you think he would have raced if he'd survived through 1970? I find that a fascinating discussion as to so many different strands in the book about, yes, he was going to stop, no, he was going to carry on.
Jochen had told Nina the morning of the day he died, that I'm carrying on, because of course he would, because Jochen was very conscious of money and the power of money and his Rindt show and everything else. And if he was world champion, it would have been ludicrous in his mind to walk away and not exploit that. But there was this other side to him. He was incredibly safety conscious, more so, I think, than ever after the Montwick Park accident. He knew how lucky he was to get away with that. And if you remember, incredible this, he wrote an open letter to both Autosport and Motoring News, criticising not only Wings, but Lotus.
No, I remember it. Absolutely. I mean, imagine Lewis Hamilton doing that, saying, listen, Mercedes, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. Unbelievable.
The only guy likely to do that these days is Max. But to actually write to the media, setting out your point of view. And then, of course, Jochen was treading this tightrope for the rest of his life. I love racing and I love what it brings me. But boy, people are dying, and particularly after Piers' accident and Bruce. And to have both of them that summer of 1970, Jochen was in this awful dilemma of being fully aware of the risk. And particularly when John Miles had a brake shaft break in Austria, all those kind of things would have made him be thinking, maybe I should get out. Now I don't have to win from Monza onwards. I can sort of pick up points and I'll be champion. And all that was going through his mind. Plus, should I stay on and earn greater money? It's very sad, I think, that even he was thinking in those terms, because that was the era that he raced in.
You talk about safety, Mark and David, and there's a paradox, isn't there? The concern for safety, particularly after Jackie Stewart's accident in Belgium, 1966, that safety was absolutely paramount, and they were so concerned about losing friends. He said Piers Courage and Bruce McLaren and so on, and yet didn't really like wearing seatbelts, rather like Stirling Moss. They were just a bit of an encumbrance that got in the way, and obviously they wanted to make sure they could somehow get out, and yet that was one of the causes of his death in 1970 in Monza, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. We were watching it again last night on Sky did a fantastic documentary, and you just realise how far down the car Jochen slid. I'm sure he would have had pretty debilitating foot injuries anyway, but the fatality was because he slid down so far in the cockpit, and the damage to his chest and thorax was what was fatal.
So is it true that effectively he didn't like to wear the crotch strap? So he essentially only had straps over his shoulders and around his waist. Is that correct?
Yeah, he didn't want the crotch straps fastened. And he just didn't like them. He didn't feel comfortable with them.
Now, one of the things that really struck me about listening to Bernie talking about Jochen, aside from the fact that Bernie and Jochen were clearly very close and that they would have gone on, I think, to do a lot of business together in the years that followed, was Bernie talking about the fact that Jochen and Colin Chapman used to have the most appalling bust-ups, and Bernie was relating that on occasion Jochen and Colin would be staying in the same hotel, but they'd be phoning Bernie somewhere else, and he would be acting as intermediary to try and resolve whatever the latest dispute was. That seemed like quite a fractious relationship that Jochen had with his team boss.
Oh, incredibly so. I mean, that was funny because when Bernie and I sat down in a locked room in China in 2008 and did this, he'd always said he'd do it, and eventually we sat down and talked for an hour, which was fascinating because this was Bernie the racer, not the politician or the ringmaster, but just a guy talking about a mate from the old days. Yeah, I mean, the Chapman thing was, there was an explosion at Silverstone in 1969 because Jochen obviously raced Jackie all the way through, and then the car ran short of petrol. But he'd got there and found that Chapman had got rid of all the 49s and he was going to have to race the four-wheel drive Lotus 63, which he hated. And he wasn't going to race that, so Chapman had to rustle up some Lotus 49s after all, and then Jochen probably would have won that race, and suddenly it all fell apart. And he shouted at Chapman and he told him his cars were crap. And nobody did that. Colin wouldn't brook the idea of a driver telling him what to do with his car. So, yeah, it was super fractious, and it went up and down and up and down. It was slightly better after Germany 1969 when they kind of had a truce. And that was the height of when Bernie was passing messages from one to the other.
What was it, do you think, that drew Bernie Ecclestone to such a strong bond and friendship with Jochen Rindt? And he also had a similar relationship, didn't he, with Niki Lauda, another Austrian. I wonder what it is that sort of appealed and clicked.
It's funny because if you ask him how they met and everything else, why they clicked, Bernie can't really answer, but one of the answers is they were both very plain speakers. They said exactly what they thought. And Jochen was funny. He was good with the people that he liked. He could be horrible with the people he didn't. But I just think they were very similar characters. They were both well aware of the value of $1. And they would almost certainly have had their own race team. Maybe Bernie would have bought Brabham sooner than he did, because Jochen was still thinking of leaving Lotus for 1971. There was still talk of an Ecclestone-Rindt team, maybe run by Roy Winkleman, like the F2 team was, but in Formula One. I could see Jochen running Formula One with Bernie, can't you?
I mean, one of the other things that really strikes me, David, is that when Jochen was racing, he wasn't just a racing driver, he was already a businessman and already exploiting his name, with the motor shows that he was arranging, carried his name above the door of those shows. I mean, quite unprecedented. We live in an era now where you look at a sports person and you think, well, they have their sporting career and then maybe they'll go on to business. Jochen was always working the different angles, wasn't he?
Yeah, and he was. He didn't sort of have people doing it for him. He adored that show. That show was really, really important to him. He always got the right people to come along, and he was passionate about making it a huge success, and he saw that very much as being his future. Which I think is great because he wanted to give something back, but he was going to be accessible to the fans. He wasn't sort of doing it through an events company or anything like that. He set everything up on his own, and he was the Jochen Rindt show.
The unmistakable voice there of David Tremayne, who along with Joe Sayward writes for www.grandprixplus.com. They'll have a full report, all sorts of detail and great expertise from both of them because they've been long-standing Formula One aficionados and writers. They'll have a full report on the Grand Prix, every Grand Prix, within 6 hours of the flag dropping. It's a very impressive performance. And he knows so much, just like Joe knows so much. And I'm just interested in talking to him about how different, Mark, Formula One would have looked if Bernie Eccleston and Jochen Rindt had got together and sort of taken the sport on. How different would it look? What a duo they would have been, my word.
Yeah, they would have been formidable. And going back to the earlier conversation with Esteban Gutiérrez, a driver who's already working on the business side of motorsport while still in the cockpit and looking forward to a career beyond the cockpit. That's exactly what Jochen Rindt was doing back in the 1960s with his very successful motor show in Vienna that he was putting his name to and promoting. And clearly he and Bernie had an excellent relationship that was going to lead to a lifelong career in business, and how fascinating that would have been. Now, people talk about lots of things in Formula One as being sad, whether it's a driver like Sergio Perez losing his drive at Racing Point or whatever. What's a really sad moment is when a driver gets into the cockpit of a racing car and they don't come back to the pits. They lose their life. And that's something that was all too familiar in Formula One back in particularly the 60s and 70s. And in the case of Jochen Rindt, the implications of that are something that we live with to this day. And obviously in speaking to David Tremayne, his biographer, you get a real sense from David and from the book about the impact that Jochen was having as a driver, and then the impact that his death had on our sport. And just from my own perspective, I think it's been really interesting to see someone like Dr. Helmut Marko, sometimes maligned as the very hard-headed boss of Red Bull Motorsports, talking quite emotionally in the last couple of weeks about his close friendship, his boyhood friendship with Jochen, and how he got involved in motor racing because of his friend Jochen Rindt. And then with Bernie, I think you see a guy who probably, it's not too fine a point to say that when he lost Jochen, he decided, that's it, I'm not going to manage drivers anymore. I'm just going to run a business. And that's what he did. He ran the Brabham Formula One team. And then he very quickly moved on from that to running the whole of Formula One. And I think Bernie never wanted to get that close to drivers ever again, because in losing Jochen, he lost a friend as well as a client, much more of a friend than a client. And so that, again, had a huge impact on our sport, which I think we're still seeing the implications of to this day. So it's a great book, and it's one that I have to admit I haven't read it fully, and I certainly plan to, because I think it's a must for every Formula One fan.
I have, and it's very good. And there is that description of Bernie Eccleston coming back to the pits at Monza in 1970, carrying Jochen Rindt's helmet. That tells you all you need to know about the impact that Jochen had on Bernie, in the sense that they had this incredible friendship and relationship, which was built on one word, trust, which in a way is the way that Bernie Eccleston dealt with so many people. If he trusted you, you were in. Two other big names we should talk about, McLaren and Williams. I'll come to Williams in a minute, but McLaren putting the MTC, the McLaren Technology Centre, up for sale. I mean, that is extraordinary. You think, I mean, I've been there many times, an extraordinary place, and that tells you where Formula One is, or particularly where the McLaren Formula One team is at the moment, surely, doesn't it?
Yeah, so this is a story that I've been covering quite a bit for Grand Prix Racing Magazine, who I write for, and, McLaren have been through a very difficult year, McLaren Group. McLaren Automotive, which has been a super successful, very profitable bit of the business, not bit of the business, actually the chunky part of McLaren Group, McLaren Automotive, has had a catastrophic year because of COVID. And as we all know, COVID started in China. Well, China is a big market for McLaren. So McLaren started to see sales being hit right back at the beginning of the year in the Chinese market. And then it spread, with the contagion, the drop in sales spread across Asia, through the Gulf, into Europe and the Americas. And it's had a devastating impact on McLaren's financial position. Now, without going into all of the nitty-gritty, the reality is that the team has needed to raise funding. So there has been clearly a big funding requirement. It's been partly fulfilled by loans put in place by the National Bank of Bahrain. Now we see they're effectively mortgaging off the headquarters and the McLaren Technical Centre, and they're mortgaging it off by actually offering the entire headquarters as an investment. So essentially, McLaren are saying, if you buy our facility from us, we will lease it back from you. We are a guaranteed tenant for at least the next 20 years. But it's a sign of the times. It's a bit of a cash crunch for McLaren, in not just Formula One, but across the car industry as well. And they need to be able to breathe until the COVID-19 pandemic eases and car sales recover and they can get back to profitability. And that's probably 18 months to 2 years away, realistically. So this is all about keeping the lights on and the doors open and having the cash necessary to do what they need to do as a business.
Which brings us to Williams, because this is the first Grand Prix weekend where there's no direct involvement from the Williams family. I mean, you must have as many stories as I do in terms of, or recollections and great memories of working alongside Frank Williams, Claire, Patrick Head. I mean, utterly committed, obsessed by the sport, wouldn't you say? Devoted fan of Jochen Rindt, by the way. I mean, if you read the book, you'll see how much he was completely besotted by the way he was able to lift a race meeting if you saw him drive. And it's been an inspirational story, hasn't it, Mark? I mean, from a public phone box in Oxfordshire to global domination, Formula One's champion team with 9 constructors' championships and 7 titles, all, and this is the key point following on from what we just said, what you've just been talking about with McLaren, all as an independent team.
Yeah, the Frank Williams story is a remarkable one. If anyone gets a chance to watch the Williams documentary, which was, I think, published in
2017,
fantastic film.
Yeah.
I would argue probably one of the best films about motor racing. Certainly one that's difficult to watch at times because there's so much to consider that comes from the Williams family story. And again, going back to my point about things that are sad or not sad. I mean, again, people have said it's very sad that Frank and Claire have gone. Formula One is a big business. It's not a corner shop. And it's a very difficult thing for a Formula One team in these contemporary times to be handed on from father to daughter or son or any other form of family succession. Actually, this is a moment of great success, I feel, for Williams, because they've run a Formula One team for a very long time, since 1977, and indeed way beyond for Frank with his other businesses in Formula One. And they've come out the other side, selling the team very successfully to its new owners at Doralton Capital. And I think that's actually mission accomplished. There are not many Formula One teams around that have managed to achieve that. And I remember having a conversation with Eddie Jordan about precisely this point when he sold up to the Midland Group. And, he felt emotional about it. But I said to him, Eddie, history will come to show that you successfully ran a Formula One team for a decade and a half, and then you sold up. And I think in the Williams family's case, they have every reason to be absolutely proud of their achievements in the sport and as a business, and the way in which that has been handed on to the new owners. I was in the very fortunate position of working directly with the team for 2 years, supplying engines from Cosworth. The management of the team was different at that time. The chief executive was Adam Parr. The technical director was Sam Michael. But I spent time with Frank, and I got to know Patrick a little bit better. And I felt there was still the spark there, certainly with Frank and with Patrick, in terms of what it was that had led them to do Formula One together in the first place. I was just thinking, actually, Jonathan, whenever you went to meet Esteban Gutiérrez at his home in London, not too far away from where you were, it was the Carlton Towers Hotel, which is where Frank Williams and Patrick Head sat down way back in 1977 and decided to work together. And Frank asked Patrick if he would design the first Williams Formula One car. So this is a story that, again, like the Jochen Rindt story, it's decades old. It's part of the fabric of Formula One. And yes, it's a shame from a personal perspective that we will not be seeing members of the Williams family at races, at least in the near term. But my goodness, what a legacy they've left. And I hope Frank really enjoys his retirement now, and that Claire goes on to do many enjoyable things in the future. I'm quite sure this is not the last we will see of Claire Williams.
I'm going to end, Mark, with a quote from Jochen Rindt. We have to pack into our lives as much as we can and use our time to the limit. Amen to that. Remember to rate and review at the controls, subscribe and spread the word. And Mark and I will speak to you again in October.